This week on the Eldritch Lorecast.
The Mighty Nein, Episode 1.
I missed my chance by something like 12 hours.
The D&D Netflix live-action series.
I'm going to hold my reaction on any D&D TV show.
The Forgotten Realms books have been delayed.
Remember when digital game releases used to be delayed?
D&D Nexus.
Will there be an online character builder?
Draw Steel is a game with high control.
All that and more right now.
Hello everybody and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the #1 tabletop RPG podcast in all the realms, and unlike other tabletop RPG content on YouTube, we're not just going to disappear on you. That's right, we're here every week. Every episode is still on YouTube. You can find us. That joke will make sense later. For now, my name's Ben Byrne. I am joined by Dael Kingsmill, Shawn Merwin, and reporting in from far afield, James Hake. And James, I have to ask you this question from Luke, who's asking, how do you keep track of your monster stat blocks across all the books, the PDFs, the emails, the YouTube videos, social media posts on Instagram or Pinterest, VTTs you might have purchases in, D&D Beyond? How do you keep all your monster stat blocks catalogued?
I mostly just use the ones I have on D&D Beyond. Any sort of app with a search function. That's my #1 way of using it. Now, this is maybe not the best way to do it. I have plenty of monster books. I have the Grim Hollow Monster Grimoire. I have Kobold Press's Tome of Beasts. I have the monsters in third-party books that I've written for, like Tal'Dorei Reborn. And all of those, I simply have to trust my own memory to handle. And knowing my memory, that's a very, very poor idea indeed. And so what it usually ends up being is I trust the breadth of the monsters that are on D&D Beyond. They do have quite a huge variety, especially now that a lot of those third-party things are on there. And if I find a monster that's close enough to what I'm looking for, I'll just tweak a few things here and there. If I need a burrowing insect, I know that the Ankeg from the Monster Manual is a prototypical burrowing insect. It's only CR2, but I can pump that up. I'll just steal the HP and AC from the Tarrasque. Why not? And then I'll just run with that. This is the sort of advice you get from someone who's been running D&D for a long time, right? And if you're brand new, a new DM looking for some kind of tool like that, I fear this answer probably won't help you very much.
James nailed it down. How do I do it? I don't. If there's something I'm designing, I need to work from the the SRD. If I'm working on Ghostfire stuff, we're up on Demiplane with our Monster Grimoire. Hopefully someday soon we'll be up on D&D Beyond. Fingers crossed. Say your prayers, throw salt over your shoulder, what have you. But if it's something I'm making for myself, I just make it up. Sounds good. I know the AC is supposed to be in this range. I know the attack is supposed to be in this range. Boom, let's do this.
Large chunks of the Monster Grimoire are currently up on D&D Beyond through Layers of Etheris. There's like 75 plus stat blocks in that alone. Thought I'd just, mention that out there.
Just
Dael
slide it
Kingsmill.
in.
Yeah, just...
You just slip it on in. Look, is the answer going to be that every single one of us says, I don't do that? Maybe, because I don't do that. I am so goosey and in fact also loosey that I am, if I am ever basing the monster I'm using on a pre-existing stat block, which let's be real, is rare for me, I do rearrange it and write it out in my notebook anyway, because
Sure.
I like the information to be in a different kind of order to the way it's organized in every source. And even then, I'm usually writing my own monster stat block before the game. I find that a little bit of fun. I don't do it on the fly like Shawn because I don't have that kind of like encyclopedic knowledge of what should be. But I do just write it out in my notebook in the same place as the rest of my adventure notes in kind of a scribbly way. That's all I do.
No, I don't get it right. I just do it. There's a difference.
Right. Just pick a number. It's that simple. I think I've run a monster from the book once. and it was like a danger room
Sure.
session. So
I really like running monsters from the book. And you know, I've gone on record as saying before that a monster manual type book for a dungeon master is like a Christmas tree with a whole bunch of presents under it. And every turn of the page for me is just unwrapping a new gift and seeing what it is. And so I love going through, like when I got the Kobold Press Tome of Foes, the first one. Tome of Beasts?
Tome of Beasts.
Tome of Beasts.
Tome of Beasts. Mordenkainen has the Tome of Foes.
Yeah.
Trixie. Anyway, the Creature Codex, Grim Hollow, Monster Grimoire, even, Monsters of Dragonheim more recently. And so I do like a good flick through a monster book, even if I'm pretty sure I know what's in it. I do like just going page to page through the PDFs of the monster books I own, or even the physicals if I have a physical, and just seeing what's there. But if I am looking for something specific like a plant or a, monstrosity or an aberration, what I used to do is use PDFs and just word search plant or monstrosity or aberration or whatever, which would have mixed results because sometimes you'd get the monster page where he's like, he plants his feet before he whatever. But D&D Beyond has become extremely useful for just searching monsters of CR or name or creature type or armor class or whatever you want to search for. And it has led to a slight, I want to say, issue for me, where if it's not on D&D Beyond, I start to become slightly blind to it. Yeah, exactly. Dael, in the back.
I was just going to ask because I don't use D&D Beyond for my monsters, and part of the issue I've found when doing that, which I guess is related to the question, is that the search engine is a little tricky in what it wants you to be typing.
Sure.
There's no room for typos. There's kind of, you'll type in like, I don't know, Dwoiga or whatever, and it'll be like, well, do you want the race? Do you want this ability? Do you want the monster? Do you want the monster but from a slightly different version of the books? And it's just like, how do you handle that?
That was terrifying because I was thinking Durgar as you were saying your initial thing.
Psychic
and then
Shawn.
you said Durgar.
Psychic Shawn.
No, that was weird. That was bizarre.
The quick answer that I have is that I don't just type it in the search bar at the top of D&D Beyond. I go resources, monsters, and that takes you to the search engine, so you're getting stat blocks. Sorry, James, go ahead.
I want to throw this out there, and this is, without knowing if it's publicly available, a pal of mine, Anto, over at Icarus Games, made this incredible spreadsheet that has every single unique monster ability from the 2024 Monster Manual on a spreadsheet, and I have been using that as a way to avoid paging through the entire monster manual when I'm looking for like reference. The Icarus Games has a YouTube channel and stuff like that, so I don't know 100% if this spreadsheet is like if the public can get it, but I'd hunt around for it if you're looking for something like that, because just knowing what exists in the expansive lineage of D&D monsters really lets you steal bits and bobs from existing monsters and, take the precedent that's already been set. And that's super great. Especially if you're publishing like publicly, it's vital. But even if you're just making things on the fly for your home game, it's still a helpful tool.
Speaking of using online resources for monsters, particularly, a little bit of news. The Mighty Nein, episode 1 of the Amazon animated series is no longer on YouTube, so you can't watch it on YouTube anymore, unfortunately. But chances are it's out on Amazon by this point. I think it's the 19th. The first episode goes up on Amazon Video. James, did you get a chance to watch it before it disappeared?
I missed my chance by something like 12 hours. I was really getting excited to watch it, actually, because my social media feed was popping off about it. I said in a previous episode that the Legends of Vox Machina was probably great for some people, but not great for me. But all the people who I trust to be CR super fans were just like enamored with this early episode of it. So I don't want to just parrot their opinions. I want to give one for myself. But boy, I missed the mark by a hair's breadth, it sounds.
I gave the Mighty Nein episode a watch. I liked it. It was fun. It definitely... I don't know if it's got like quote unquote a darker tone than the Legends of Vox Machina does, but it definitely balances its tone better because it's not seesawing between like incredibly childish crass humor and like extreme hyper animated violence. It really just sits in the latter half much more. The one thing I thought was interesting, and you might love this particular viewer, I don't think it's a bad thing, but it just definitely caught my eye, is that it is not a fantasy show really in the same way that like Star Wars is not sci-fi. It's kind of a sci-fi show because almost all of the magic in it is just Flintstone style technology that is magic, right? Like magic phone calls, that's not a phone, it's a magic device. And magic C4 used to blow up a wall, that's not C4, it's magic crystals that explode and magic
Doesn't that
shield
just describe
and-
D&D though, half the time?
I guess. It is very D&D. The thing that I thought, and I swear this is not self-aggrandizing, but I was like, if you want your D&D game to take on the feel of the first episode of The Mighty Nein, you should play Agents of the Empire from the Ethereal Expanse. The Magitech vibe to it, that kind of mixes that feeling of like magic and technology together, where it feels less arcane and less eldritch and less unpredictable, but much more sort of like, yeah, everybody's got their magic something in their pocket that they pull out and just kind of throw around, you know what I mean?
I do think the way that D&D spells work lend themselves well to that sort of interpretation, right? Especially in modern incarnations. In old D&D, its spell slots were drawing from the tradition of Jack Vance's Dying Earth books. And in those books, the spells were like living psychic beings that you kind of coerced into you and memorized. And memorizing the spell literally purged it from the pages of your brain. And so you were kind of doing this interesting negotiation with the raw arcane power of the world. Now, did D&D ever take a narrative bent in that direction? No, not really. But the mechanics of it as they flowed towards 5e have become very, a spell is this, right? It's a piece of game design. It's a little module that you plug in, and that makes them quite predictable and scientific. And
Quite technical.
Yes, technical. It's a great word for it. Because, you know, when you cast Magic Missile, you kind of know what you're going to get. It's not going to draw from any of these sort of darker fantasy tones where magic is unpredictable. That's not part of the D&D fantasy. So yeah, this feels like a very natural progression of that, whether you like that or not.
Well, it'll be on Amazon in the next couple of days. It might even be up by the time you're listening to this episode of the Lorecast, so go check it out. And speaking of D&D TV shows, just a rapid fire, quick bit of news. Shawn Levi, who I believe is one of the producers, most well-known, most recently, he's worked on Stranger Things. Also, he was the director, I believe, for the Deadpool Wolverine movie. So you would have seen his name around. He spoke to Collider recently. He was asked a quick question about the D&D Netflix live-action series that they've had producing. He said, quote, "I think the reason it's taken so long and the reason why it is a challenging process is you're not adapting story IP. You're adapting a world and a lexicon and a spirit, but story needs to be invented largely from scratch. And it needs to be invented in a way that feels organic and everything that's great about D&D. Apparently, the show's still in very active development and really, really hopes it moves forward. That's the news.
I'm going to hold my reaction on any D&D TV show until one of them comes out. I think that's where I'm at right now, because I feel like we've done this story like 3 or 4 times.
Totally.
You know, Dael, that's probably a good idea, but I can't help myself. So I will say, I think philosophy, I think Shawn has the right philosophy here.
Shawn Levy or Al Shawn?
Well, both usually. But it does sort of preclude the notion that this D&D TV series is going to be Dragonlance. Right? We've seen Joe Manganiello and Tracy Hickman and Margaret Weiss in the Wizards' offices. We talked a little bit about, does this mean the Dragonlance TV show is back on? Shawn Levy's comments do not suggest, at least, that he is behind the wheel for that particular idea. And given that broadly the story of Honor Among Thieves, the movie, was brand new, using some D&D IP elements like Red Wizards and Harpers, etc., I think it's doable. I think his notion is probably takes a little bit more work than adapting a Marvel comic, but I think the outcome is quite well worth it.
Yeah, I've had this argument with folks before about creating something for a story versus creating something for a world, and how the story, if you're creating something for a story, the story's there. If it's an existing world as opposed to a world you're creating yourself, it is fraught with having to meet the expectations of a bunch of people who all have different expectations. You're right. George, people always throw out, oh, well, look at Star Wars. Star Wars didn't have a story. Yes, but Star Wars was also creating the world in which these stories are told, as opposed to people who have to deal with D&D, where there are all the mechanics, there are all the NPCs, there are all these things that are existing that then need to be not copied verbatim, because then it seems old or trite, but capturing the essence of that and making it your own is the challenge that the writers, the storytellers have to manage here. So I think what Shawn 2 here says is absolutely true. And, kudos to Shawn for taking the time to not just go through the hassle of all the production stuff that goes on with streams and television production and so on, but taking the time to build something that hopefully will be sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and also kudos for, I think, being the first person to fully verbalize what is the challenge of doing this thing. Yeah. I feel like other statements we've gotten of like, yes, I am hopeful and we'll make this D&D show have been a little bit empty and just like, yeah, we'll make it work because I love it. And that's fine. But this feels like he is saying, well, it's hard, but we're talking about it. And that feels more valuable or weighty somehow.
I don't think Ben has this in the show notes, but there also was an article in the BBC about Warhammer. And Warhammer,
now you have my attention.
Warhammer, Games Workshop working with working with Amazon to create movies and television shows. It is going to be, according to this article, a year before they even start, because they need to work out all the do's and don'ts, can and can'ts between the creative team and the Warhammer team. So that's a year just to say, don't
is this the project that Superman Geralt is involved in?
hey, not Geralt. Not anymore.
Okay.
Don't you?
Whoa, hey.
Yeah.
Wow.
Hey.
I thought it was
he's not even Superman anymore.
Once a king or queen of Narnia, always a king or queen of Narnia, but I'm learning that's not the case with The Witcher. Wow.
Geralt in my heart. He's Geralt in my heart.
That was your Witcher Watch this week, folks.
No, super quick Witcher Watch, because I have been meaning to. I watched season 4. I don't like it. It's honestly overall pretty terrible. It's not entirely not Chris Hemsworth, Liam. The other Hemsworth. Sorry, Liam. Oh man, I just overshadowed you with your brother even worse. Yeah. It's not entirely Liam's fault. He's doing a perfectly great job with the material. To be honest, everybody is, but it's kind of farcical at some points. There's like a witch burning scene that plays out legitimately like a Python skit more than it does like a dark fantasy moral quandary. It's ridiculous. But I will say, without spoilers, if anybody is still interested in watching it, the last 10 minutes, the very last scene of the last episode, they suddenly remembered they were making a dark fantasy show, and it goes metal for a full 10 minutes, and you are left thinking,
this is
what
how
the
I felt about
fuck
the Dark
was that?
Crystal series, where the last 10 minutes of the last episode was just incredible.
Yeah.
I loved that show.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not even going to say it was incredible. It was just hardcore in a way that the rest of the series completely forgot to be. It was weird. It was a tonal shift in a really brutal way.
I want to jump in and talk about the movie adaptation game pipeline a little bit, because I've recently fallen into the World of Warcraft rabbit hole, and that led me.
What other geekdom can we get in here? Go on, please.
Yeah, and one of the people who I play with in my dungeon delving group, I rewatched the Warcraft movie that came out 10 years ago. I saw that movie in theaters. It's the movie that got me from playing Hearthstone and being mildly interested in Warcraft when I was in college to actually playing World of Warcraft and really enjoying it for the time that I was in college. And let it be said, Warcraft is a terrible movie. And not only that, it's a pretty wet, limp adaptation of the Warcraft material.
Also, we all know that the true adaptation, the series based on World of Warcraft is, of course, The Guild.
Of course, The Guild. But I want to talk about the Warcraft movie just a little bit because it's a very interesting case study if you know about what all was going on around it. Not unlike Baldur's Gate 3 and Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus, the Warcraft movie, directed by David Bowie's child, was supposed to tie into the launch of a WoW expansion called Warlords of Draenor. And so that expansion was all about the original Orcish horde and their leaders and the original conflict, how the orcs come to Azeroth and partner with demons and warlocks. And the movie focuses on the very early story of the games, which involves all the orc clans and demons and coming to Azeroth, all the same stuff. And so it's this picture perfect bit of brand synergy that the suits over at Activision, no doubt, had dollar signs in their eyes over. And yet, because making a game and making a movie are two very volatile processes that honestly only tend to complete by matters of pure luck and happenstance, getting them to release in a synergistic time frame is a fool's errand, and people keep screwing this up. And so, of course, Warlords was already long in the tooth by the time the Warcraft movie came out, and that led to the Warlords expansion as a whole, we hypothesize, being gutted. Warlords is notorious for being a content light sort of, it had a dead year at the end of its sort of like ongoing game situation, and broadly considered one of the worst expansions that game ever saw. And then the one that came after it is widely hailed as one of the best expansions the game ever saw, because clearly they wanted to ride the movie's coattails into something new rather than follow a, dead expansion into the future. And so it just goes to show that often trying to make these things work together in this synergistic way is more trouble than it's worth, which is why I'm really happy, bringing it back to what Shawn Levy was saying, that it doesn't seem like there's a particular story tie-in with D&D. They're adapting the philosophy and the ethos and the mood of D&D rather than, try this whole can of worms again and potentially wreck another product in trying to make them fit together like gears.
And James Hake will be back next week with another TED Talk. No, but I think very good points.
Oh.
Speaking of delays, the Forgotten Realms books have been delayed in their shipping out to the Asia Pacific and European markets. This is the physical books. The digital copies, I believe, are already online, particularly through D&D Beyond. So the new release date for the Forgotten Realms, Heroes of Faerun and Adventures in Faerun for the EU and UK is now December 12th. They have a solid date. For Australia and New Zealand, it's early January. For Singapore, Malaysia, it's late January. For Indonesia, the Philippines, and Thailand, it's early Feb. No official reason has been given for these delays beyond, apparently there are just shipping issues to those regions currently. I feel like, honestly, Dael, you can correct me if you feel differently, but we're pretty used to this. Like, Australia releases are always a bit behind.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, sometimes even when it doesn't make sense. Remember when digital game releases used to be delayed?
Yeah.
What was that about?
Well, moving on from that, speaking of D&D Beyond, where you can currently get Heroes in Faerun and Adventures in Faerun and the Faerun books, you can also get them on D&D Nexus. What's D&D Nexus, you ask? D&D Nexus is the new rebranded demi-plane platform to find all things D&D 5e, previously called 5e Nexus. It has evolved and achieved the official Dungeons & Dragons branding, and now stocks official 5e 2024 core rulebooks, including the Forgotten Realms books, which are up there right now. And this is kind of a big deal.
D&D Beyond has never had an officially licensed competitor. Demiplane is owned by the company that is also owning Roll20 and One Bookshelf, Drive-Thru RPG, right? So Drive-Thru RPG and Roll20 have had official D&D licensed material on there before. You can buy the Player's Handbook, etc. on Roll20. So on paper, it seems like very similar stuff happening. But there's a huge gulf in terms of what the product for Roll20 is and what the product for a digital tool set in much the way that D&D Beyond is.
The big question for me is, will there be an online character builder for Demiplane 5e Nexus or D&D Nexus?
You said Is there not already?
There is not. There is not at least as far as I can tell, and I do use it infrequently, but I do use it. There is no online character builder for 5e. But if you go now to the create a character button, you click create a character in Demiplane, and it gives you this long list of games that you can create a character for. And at the very bottom of that, you have to scroll, get to the bottom, and it says Dungeons and Dragons or D&D. Now, if you click that, nothing happens. It's not linked to anything, but it's there, which makes me think, would you put it there if you weren't going to create a character builder? And you have to remember, too, that Demiplane as a company was created by some of the people who created D&D Beyond. So it is very much along those same lines. So we've heard over the last months or so, folks from Wizards saying, we don't want to compete. We want people to be able to play our game on whatever platform that they want. And so this would be really putting their money where their mouths are if they allow Demiplane to build a character builder that has their core books and their supplements in it.
Yeah, I mean, especially because once this gets up and running, if you're a new player, chances are just through like internet traffic flow and SEO and all that, you're probably going to end up on D&D Beyond if you're searching D&D just in Google, right? But if you've got friends that play or whatever the case may be, would you know the difference between D&D Beyond and D&D Nexus, and which one is the official like Wizards of the Coast? As much as this makes a difference to like a user, which one's the official Wizards of the Coast like owned of those two? I would have thought that would make a difference to Wizards of the Coast, but like you said, Shawn, they're really letting people access, official material wherever the people want it to be.
I think the most important thing here is it cracks open a brand new wing of the old argument. If I buy a physical book, do I get it for free on D&D Beyond and Roll20 and Demiplane and all of these things? A whole new battlefront for this age-old fight.
Yay.
Well, there is a little bit of that in that if you buy something on Roll20, you now get it on Demiplane as well. So that does open up this idea of cross-platform within the same company now, of course.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think D&D Beyond Maps, it's trying to fill the exact same role. It's very interesting. They're both a little bit deficient in each other's specialties. D&D Maps has been in beta for years and shows no sign of emerging from it. But Demiplane doesn't have a character sheet, which I think was the main selling point of D&D Beyond for its entire lifespan. And having been with that company for some time, easily the hardest part of the entire enterprise. But there are character sheets on Demiplane for Daggerheart and Pathfinder 2 and other games, so it's not that they can't do it. It's that I think the volumetric enormity of D&D makes it challenging to handle all of its corners.
Yeah, I'm really surprised at it because they had like 5e Nexus before and they had an SRD version of the rules up there, which I believe... I'm surprised they don't have a character builder already. I should have gone and dug a little deeper because I guess I just assumed. They do have... because I've used these before, a long time ago now, search engines, though, for searching things within D&D Nexus. I almost said D&D Beyond Nexus. D&D Nexus.
See, there's no confusion to be had, Ben. You're imagining it.
Well, I know this because, and Michael in chat asked before, is there one for third parties? D&D Nexus is for third parties because there are currently third parties up there, including... the Grim Hollow Monster Grimoire. If you want your monsters in a searchable database from the Grim Hollow Monster Grimoire, D&D Nexus is the place to go. If you want character options, D&D Beyond. It won't get confusing at all. You know exactly where everything is. It's totally fine.
Fascinating.
Cool. All right. There's also Kobold stuff up there at the moment, but D&D Nexus is a little thin on third-party and, for that matter, first-party offerings at the moment. But I guess it's just because it hasn't been their focus up until now. So I would expect that to populate probably pretty quickly over the next 6 to 12 to 18 months.
6 to 12 to 18.
Yeah, somewhere in there.
Somewhere in that range.
Hedging my bets. Hedging my bets.
Hedging my bets. Sorry, that's how you said it.
Yeah, no, you're
My
right.
life.
That's totally true. Well, speaking of time, it has come to an end, not of the episode, but of the Kickstarter United Union strike has ended.
Hooray!
The union has voted to the following compromises with the Kickstarter management. They wanted the 4-day work week kind of enshrined. What they have gotten or voted to agree to is the 4-day work week is enshrined with provisions for limited temporary changes to 5-day work weeks with notice and limits to that period coming into effect. The salary floor has been raised, and an escalating floor rise through the years has been agreed to. They were asking for $85K a year minimum salary. I don't think they quite got that, but they did get, agreements that there would be escalations in salary. And the lowest paid workers at Kickstarter will currently receive a one-off $6,000 bonus to the lowest paid employees. And lastly, a commitment to not replace workers with either AI or contractors. So I believe a good result for everyone all round.
Unions can be a wonderful thing.
Unions can be a wonderful thing.
Congratulations. Winning a fight like that, or even getting a positive outcome in a fight like that, is never a sure thing. So well done, workers of Kickstarter.
And speaking of positive things, just another quick shout out again to the Ghostfire Gaming merch store, which I will copy a link to.
I had a bit I was going to do for this and I forgot about it until right now.
That's all right. That's fine. I mean, people can see this wonderful werewolf shirt that I'm wearing, which I was wearing last week. You can get a shirt just like this if you go to the merch store. Mostly it's Grim Hollow merchandise at the moment, but it is possible you're not into werewolves. You're not a werewolf person.
He's doing it again!
In fact, maybe you're more of a aberrant horror transformation and you want to have all tentacles and stuff on your shirt split into two people. You could do that. Or you know what? Maybe you desire power you can control rather than necessarily being an aberrant horror. So maybe you want a lich transformation shirt and really harness the power of necromantic destruction. If your character is definitely evil and you like necromancy, then this might be the shirt for you. Or you might not want to play an evil character at all. You might, in fact, want to play a good aligned character, in which case the celestial transformation might be the shirt for you, which has angels on it and kind of the Grim Hollow golden skull angel, which I love that artwork. So go check out the Ghostfire Gaming merch store. Find a shirt or a tote bag or a notebook that is right for you. Any of those shirts, Dael, did you have a favorite among those?
Well, my favorite, you showed my favorite last week was the vampire. Which
Great
feels
choice.
like I'm betraying my heart of hearts, which is werewolves, but I really like the vampire one. I really do. You have to do this bit again next week so that I have time to prepare my bit.
Okay, we'll see. We'll see how we go. James, Shawn, did either of you have you been eyeing any of these shirts or tote bags or notebooks?
I have been eyeing all 7 of them so that I can pull off a truly disgusting bit.
I'm wearing 4 tote bags right now.
Yes!
Right, okay. Great. And remembering any merch that you do buy, any time that you purchase a Ghostfire Gaming product, particularly using the links that help support this podcast. So thank you, anybody out there. And yeah.
Anybody out there?
Is anybody out there? Speaking of supporting this podcast, you can also send emails to podcast@ghostfiregaming.com, and I swear we'll take and read them sometimes. And this is one of those times where Harry has emailed in and asked kind of an interesting game design question. Bear with me as I kind of express Harry's question here, which is talking about how many tabletop RPGs have high crunch and low crunch in the rule system, high rules complexity, low rules complexity. But Harry argues there is a third part, which they call control, which is how, in kind of my words, to be honest, contained is the game within its systems compared to how more free flow play is, where the system may not be getting interacted with directly at all times that you're playing the system. I believe Harry provides the examples that Draw Steel is a game with high control because between using negotiations for social encounters, combat encounters being highly mechanized, and montage tests, there's always some game system that's being interacted with. Whether it's 5e, Harry uses as a lower example of control, where players spend more time in conversation that doesn't necessarily require dice rolls or any system interaction. I think a really low one would be like a Fiasco, where you're really just, talking to each other, and then the game systems don't really get interacted with in the scenes themselves as you're discussing them. I've kind of described in the past how open or closed a game system is. A fully closed system is like a board game, or even most war games, where the extent of what you can do in the game is contained within the rules of the game. This is a game about, Descent Journeys in the Dark is a game about delving dungeons. You can't decide that you're not going to delve in a dungeon and still be playing that board game. Catan is about settling, and if you want to do something else in Catan, you simply can't. It's not part of the game. Where there is a more open game, a free-flow game is one like a tabletop RPG, where it's like, well, could my character do this? And the GM kind of decides whether that can be introduced into the story, whether it requires interaction with the system, or whether they just yes and it becomes this improvised part of the narrative.
Ben, it's very interesting because I feel like I was with you at the beginning, and the more we talk about examples, the farther afield I get from this conversation. Okay. Because I think every game can be improvisational, right? I could play Monopoly the RPG using everything in the box and nothing more if the game were moderated by a GM that were interested in taking player suggestions. Would I be playing the spirit of the game particularly closely? No, but that's any game. I think the distinction here for me is how closely do you follow the mechanics for the systems that they're presented for, right? D&D is an interesting example because it has I think reasonably robust rules for social interaction with its what are they called? The attitudes that the NPCs can have of friendly, hostile, indifferent. And in fact, the 2024 rules have even expanded on them by creating the new action type influence that deliberately, and if you look in the rules index at the back, interacts with those states of NPC play. Now, I would say that the folk tradition of playing D&D, however, rarely interacts with those rules because for one reason or another, it just doesn't get talked about much. Maybe in 5e, that was because it was locked away in the back of the Dungeon Master's Guide in this chapter that no one looked at. And now that it's in the player's handbook, maybe that will change. Or maybe it won't, right? For almost 50 years, D&D has had precious few rules on that sort of interaction. That's just the culture now. I have more to say, but I need to think about it for a little while longer before I say something I might not agree with in 5 minutes. So take it away.
Yeah, what you started with, James, was exactly what I had written here. A game is a machine that's always contained within its own system. So that doesn't mean that gameplay needs to live only within those rules. So the game, by the definition of a game, is these are the rules. It's what you decide to do with it outside. What's interesting to me is a slightly different discussion, which is why did other games, role-playing games, tabletop role-playing games, spring up to challenge D&D? Some of it was genre, right? I don't like sword and sorcery. I want horror, so Call of Cthulhu is there. I wanted spies, so Top Secret was there. But some of it was people wanted a more closed system than the game was allowing.
Sure.
They didn't want the paladin to be able to go up and kill random strangers without some sort of consequence that was written in the rules apart from what the game master would say. So a lot of this discussion of control was people's desire for their character's personality, their character's story to mean something within the game system itself. That's why we started seeing games like Fate come to the fore, because then who your character is what your character can do. And, but you wouldn't say that Fate was less of a closed or less of a control system, because there's still that storytelling interaction between the players and the game master and the players and each other. So I feel like as we try to define something, what's control and what's not, or what's open and what's closed, there's two or more axes that you have to decide what means what, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
Yeah.
No, I get you.
I think you're touching on something that, I mean, clearly chat is headed in this direction as well. They're talking a lot about terminology and definitions. And when we look at this question, I'm kind of sticking a little bit on terminology and definition, because I'm wondering if I'm misunderstanding the question, because everything that's described to me is what crunch is. You know what I mean? Like, crunch, to me, when we talk about crunchy systems, it is about how much do those game rules codify, as James said in chat, you know, the different systems, the different things that you attempt to do. Are there rules for that? And then, you know, to what James was saying earlier, I think there's a lot to be said about, yeah, and people in chat as well, you know, you can make any system very open and free flowing and improvisational. You can, you know, someone said people play with the horses as kids long before they learn the rules for chess. But then I would say, is that chess? If you're not kind of making a good faith attempt to stick to the rules as written and as intended, are you playing that game, or are you playing a different game with the tools that game created? So I think a lot of it for me comes down to those definitions of crunch, of open, of improvisation, of game. What is game? You know, and I think it becomes a very difficult thing, a difficult question to answer. When we can't quite pin down those definitions.
We found the core rule book of Theseus.
There's a really good YouTube channel. I think I've recommended it before, but this listener might really enjoy this YouTube channel if they enjoy talking about game design. It's called SPGD. Sam Pearson Game Design. Sam Pearson, the YouTuber, was a designer for the Games Workshop studio, designed Spearhead, the recent Warhammer Age of Sigmar kind of game mode, but talks a lot about like what Jez Goodwin taught him in game design, and talks about things like really talks about crunch versus non-crunch in a way that might be relevant to this conversation, and kind of like I think maybe help separate crunch from control a little bit in our heads as we're talking about it. He talks about, and I think there's a specific word for it, but I can't remember what it is, but it's in one of his videos talking about the role-playing / war game called Inquisitor, which was notoriously intensely crunchy and had massive like delay, because to figure something out, it took a really long time. And in fact, the Witcher role-playing game is an example of this as well, where like a single attack has a flow chart that you need to move through to be like, okay, do I attack? Yes. Where am I facing? This direction. What am I attacking with? What sort of attack am I making? What armor are they wearing? What do they do in response to my attack? Do they try to parry, dodge, or block? How does that affect, you know, and it becomes this full thing. But that could still be a game with light control outside of combat, which it's not. But anyway, I don't know if I'm making any sense here. I'm kind of rambling a little bit. But SPGD is a good YouTube channel for kind of talking about game design with definitions that kind of make a lot of sense when Sam's talking about them, and make you go, huh, that makes sense.
Dear listener, dear emailer, Thank you for sending us a wonderful question. There's no possible chance we could have answered that question.
Dear Harry.
Right? This is an excellent sort of chestnut that game designers will be turning over in their minds until the sun goes out or until we stop playing games. And who knows which one will come first. And so for giving us the opportunity to chew our cud on this a little bit, I do really appreciate it. It's a great topic.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me ask you this, because Dael was saying something. I was Googling SPGD, the YouTube channel, whilst they were talking. But you said something around like, if we're playing Monopoly or chess, but we're doing, we're slightly ignoring the rules or we're moving in ways that's a bit more improvisational than the rules strictly define, are we still playing chess? And I think I agree with that, with the idea that, like, no, if you change the rules from a closed system, you're no longer playing that game, Like, you might call it Chess 2 or Chess the role-playing game, but that's not playing chess anymore. But I'm known among my friends for turning every game into a role-playing game, and they're like, would you consider, let's say, like I might be playing chess and then like being, yes, my kingdom is being invaded by this fallow king who is bringing his army to my doorstep and I shall defeat him. Forward, men, forward, riders. Is that changing the game even if we're playing the rules entirely within? Is that part of the game or is that just conversation at the table?
Casper, I will give you a weird look. That one's for my chess heads out there.
Fair enough. Magnus might punch me.
I think a different way to look at that question is you take a sport like basketball, right? So basketball, You've got 5 people on a side and you play a game with whatever the rules say, 15-minute quarters and 2 points for a shot unless you're outside the 3-point arc, et cetera, et cetera. You're playing basketball. You can also play half-court 3-on-3. Now, that's a different game. But are you still playing basketball? So again, the definition of are you still playing chess if you change how the pieces move?
They're fuzzy sets.
Yes.
I do think it is worth bringing up that chess, you say, if I do this, does it change the game? Even though I'm sticking to the rules because now I'm role playing it. But I mean, let's acknowledge right now, chess is not a game stripped of all flavor text. The pieces are made to look like castles and kings and queens and horses, and we call it a knight and we call it a bishop. Like, there is story layered on top of that game already. So it already is fuzzy. It's not like here's like the strictest logic game in the universe, even though we kind of treat it that way. It has a story.
Here's just something else that occurred to me as I was talking is I used to play chess with my late grandfather. And something he used to do constantly when he was playing chess was he would look at the board, think about his move, and then he'd just mutter under his breath. He'd be like, yeah, okay, so I'm going to move that there, and then he's going to do that, but then I got him because I'm going to do this. Like he just kind of like, whether he was actually thinking of anything or not, I have no idea. But I've started doing that when I play chess with people as well, of just going like, yeah, okay, so I think if I do this, that's going to make him do, and that's introducing like the psychological element. Mm-hmm. Shawn, when you were talking about basketball, I thought you were going to go into talking about trash talk, when you're trash talking the other side. And I'm like, is that changing the game? If you try to introduce that psychological element, it's not strictly role playing, but it's just kind of trying to put your opponent in a headspace that you can take advantage of, so to speak. And is that, I know there's no answer to this question, but is that like a different game than just strictly silently playing chess or basketball or whatever game?
Or trash talking when you're the DM playing at a table, right? Depending on the group, if you're at a convention and you
can try,
you come up to certain groups that want you to play as tough as you can. They want the biggest challenge. And so trash talking them is a great skill to have as a game master. Now, don't do it, obviously, to the people that don't like that. But, for sure.
But it has the most impact on. This actually reminds me. This is slightly off topic, but it reminds me of when my dad was in high school, and he was friends with a bunch of the footy guys. But he was in like debate and stuff, and so he would spend their matches out talking to people whose positions were like near the edge of the field. He would just chat to them and distract them while they were doing stuff. And then his footy mates would come to his debates and sit in the front row and look huge and intimidating.
That how can you play the game that are technically within the rules? Well, speaking of rules, let's jump to this quick last question from Thak, who asks about system agnostic adventures, throwing away the rules. Does being, quote, system agnostic, as in not tied to D&D or Daggerheart or Drawsteel or any specific game system, help or harm the usability of an adventure module? The adventure might provide the story, the background, the lore, and even ideas for encounters and monsters. It might say, hey, here's a troll, or here's a ghost, without like tying it to a specific type of ghost. And it's up to the game master to go and find the appropriate stat blocks within the system that they're playing. The GM can insert relevant stat blocks and call for appropriate ability checks for their system as you move through the adventure module. Is this beneficial or harmful to a module?
Well, I think that something interesting that just happened was the inclusion of the phrase, like, look up the appropriate stat blocks, look up the, do the appropriate skill check. But what if you're writing this, agnostic adventure and someone tries to run it in a game system that does not have ability checks or does not have monster stat blocks in that sense, right? Like, I don't think that, I'm not going to say you can't, but I think it's very difficult to actually write an adventure that is truly system agnostic. I think you can get down to some basics. You can be like D20 fantasy style, but I think it gets really difficult beyond that, because if you write your, dragon hunting adventure where there are stat blocks for dragons that, left blank for you to fill in, and there are ability checks, you can't exactly run it in Kids on Bikes. That's it doesn't quite, it's never. Not never. It is very difficult to make it truly system agnostic. I think the other thing that I can say that might be valuable is that I don't know whether it harms usability, but I certainly think it harms marketability. If you're trying to get your adventure out there for people to use, I think that it becomes really difficult because people don't know what the key terms of your adventure they haven't read are. So they can only search the key terms of like the system they're using and things like that. So it just really cuts down on the ways that you can reach people. And I think those are the only valid things I have to say on the matter.
Dael, I was about to say basically the exact same thing. The more systems I've played, the less I believe in system agnostic adventures. So you've covered all that stuff. I want to talk about a time when I adapted an adventure from one game to another. I've mentioned it on the Lorecast before, but it's a Dragon Age RPG adventure from Green Ronin called The Amber Rage. It's from a book called Blood and Ferelden. It's one of my favorite RPG adventures ever. And it's tuned for a 3D6 system. It's tuned for dark fantasy. It's tuned for the world of Thedas. And yet, there's not really all that much preventing it from being played in 5e. Because I think a lot of the assumptions of that system, even though it's not D20 fantasy, it's target number fantasy, right? It's roll over fantasy. I think in Daggerheart it might be a harder conversion, but honestly not even that much, because that is also a rollover fantasy game at its deep down core. The only system that I don't feel like I would learn or develop in any way as a GM from trying to adapt it, which is how I felt when I turned it into the D&D Next playtest, is how long ago that was, is if I were trying to adapt it to like Blades in the Dark, it's just not a good fit. If I were to adapt it to Monster of the Week, it's not a good fit. And so, yeah, I think making, Powered by the Apocalypse, that's a great umbrella for developing stuff for. Making Forged in the Dark, that's a great, develop for families of games. And the D&D family tree is Genghis Khan level huge, just because of the nature of its inception. So, be free to make a system agnostic adventure. So like you said, Dael, I do think it harms marketability. Just make a D&D adventure or a Pathfinder adventure. The people who find it, they'll do what they need to do with it.
Marketability is huge. Why do people buy adventures? Most people will say, I buy the adventure because I don't have time to create my own, so I want to have something I can run. I hear a lot of people say, I buy it to mine. I will never run an adventure as written. I mine it for ideas. Yet when I talk to those people many, many times, they really do end up running it pretty much as written. They may think they're making changes, but they're not. The question is really, how do game masters use these published adventures? The problem is many times game masters already have ideas, and what they need is the blueprint for turning those ideas into a really great session, a really great adventure. And if you are making something that's just ideas and not the blueprint for how to run them, you're not serving the audience that I think most purchasers of adventures make up.
Like, maybe there's a way to do it. I'd love to. Maybe it just means that I lack the imagination and skill. Because I would love to see someone make it work. If someone somehow found a way to package it generally enough that they were like, and here will be a combat encounter. But even then, what if your game doesn't have combat? What if it doesn't have combat?
Call of Cthulhu, that's a very different thing from Pathfinder.
Yeah. Or maybe a branching story. It's like, well, here are the 3 decision points in the adventure path. Maybe there's a way to do it, but I don't know. I think it's not as straightforward as it maybe seems on the surface.
I think it's illustrative to compare it to video games. I would not create a module that is system agnostic between Age of Mythology, Darkest Dungeon, and Slay the Spire. Fundamentally incompatible ideas.
Well, what's the, I think you've said it before, Dael, the form is the function or the function is the form is kind of like, you know, even within, I mean, we were talking about game crunch and control and whatnot earlier. Even within certain games, you know, like if you compare Shadowdark to D&D 5th edition, both D20 systems that kind of function similarly to each other, but both in subtle or not so subtle ways really encourage different types of adventures and campaigns where Shadowdark wants you to delve into the dungeon. It's kind of like comparing, and maybe this is a false equivalency, but like comparing Darkest Dungeon to Skyrim. You know what I mean? There's just so much more within 5th edition for an open kind of exploring other spaces. And then comparing like 5th edition to something like Pathfinder, you know, not that the adventures would be wildly different necessarily, and those two are probably very cross-compatible in the sorts of themes and locations that their adventures would cover, but what sort of experience are you going to have? Are you going to have a adventure of high combat, and the point is to go and defeat this monster through clever use of your own abilities? Or is it more of a social adventure, or does it try to mix both of those elements together? Does one system between 5e and Pathfinder do either of those things better? I don't know the answer to that. That's a genuine question. But yeah, I just find that system agnostic adventures is just a novel. Like, it's just a story at that point that's not written particularly well because it's trying to be written as a manual.
It kind of reminds me of one of the big criticisms, actually, of Kids on Bikes, the first edition, was that the adventure prompts that come in it are really just that. They are just prompts. It's just like, here's an idea. The CIA is, you know, have a secret, or the Russians have a secret base under the mall. Sorry, I forgot what the actual ones were, so I just swapped over to Stranger Things. But, you know, it's just like, that's the thing now, go. And a lot of people found that really difficult because they couldn't run it. It didn't guide them in any way. And I think that you're running into really similar issues.
You know, some people in chat are talking about, yeah, hey, you should talk with such and such people because they do this stuff, right? They publish system agnostic stuff. And I would be curious to talk to someone who is really an enormous proponent of system agnostic material, because I think we're all sort of, you know, neutral to slightly sour on the idea. But I'd love to hear the opinion of someone who loves system agnostic stuff from a fundamental standpoint. I'm really curious.
I've worked with system agnostic adventures as an editor, as a designer. And what's great about them is if you have a really unique story, you can impart that story and you can give enough contextual information to allow people who are really well versed in their own rules systems a way to it's a guide. It's a guide for them. So this should be a very difficult encounter. If it's a social encounter, it should be very difficult to convince blank. If it's a combat encounter, it should be very difficult to defeat. And with that defeat or with that success comes this next part of the story. And these are how these things are linked. So as Ben said, it's like a novel, but it's a really good novel. The problem is so many times, even the ideas for these system agnostic adventures are just tropes that anyone who's versed in the system would already know. I'm going to tie this back to the Mighty Nein trailer I watched, and I apologize now, but I watched the trailer and I'm like, this could be any fantasy thing I've ever seen ever in my life. I don't know any of the characters. I don't know the plot. They're just saying the things that I expect characters in a trailer to say. Now, this might be the best story ever told, but that trailer, all that trailer tells me is this is just one more fantasy thing. And that's what you can't let your system agnostic adventure be, is just one more fantasy thing where you start in a tavern, you go to the sheriff points you to the caves, and in the caves there's a bunch of monsters, right? If you're doing that, you're not doing a service to your consumers at all.
Just one more fantasy thing. Man, we used to pray for times like these.
I know.
I also think that the thing itself, like I find system agnostic adventure modules for reasons that we've already discussed, not particularly useful because, as Shawn said before, an adventure module is there for you to pick something up and just run it with ease. And if you have to slap mechanics onto it yourself, go search for stat blocks yourself, it's not really that useful as an adventure module anymore, right? But something that I do find with our YouTube channel in particular, like YouTube videos, we just did one about why you shouldn't start your campaign in a tavern, and here's 7 ideas of alternative places you could start your campaign. Now, that could be relevant to D&D, Daggerheart, Tales of the Valiant, Draw Steel, because we don't talk system within that video whatsoever. The video before that we did make aboleths formidable as monsters. The first half of that video could really be applied to any system because it's just, what is the themes of this monster? How should it make your players feel? What would this dungeon look like? What are the sort of things that might be in this dungeon? But invariably with these formidable videos, the end of it ends up being much more tied to 5th edition because we're talking about what makes this monster formidable in its stats, in its rules. What is it going to do to your players and how can they, combat against that? And if that part of the video stays system agnostic, I think it loses some of its usability because the GM kind of has to figure out more of that stuff for themselves rather than getting actual practical, this ability will do this ability will link to this theme, etc., etc. Not to mention aboleths, I don't know if they exist in many other systems. I don't know if they're like a D&D specific thing or not.
They're in Pathfinder.
Like Beholders certainly are. Right, there you go.
Maybe there's some way of presenting just the challenges and no form of solution. Just let that be up to the players. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep noodling on this for a while.
I think adventure hooks, totally useful as system agnostic. The adventure hooks in the Grim Hollow campaign guide.
Like even on a smaller level, like if you go, there is a guard at the door, and then don't offer any solutions. If it's a combat system, maybe they'll fight the door. They'll fight the door. Just like true D&D.
I kind of disagree. I think if you're going to get that specific, give them a stat block. Right? Make it part of the system.
But then
a
it's
broader
not
adventure hook. No, but that's the point. That's what I'm saying is that I don't think it's as useful.
I ultimately agree with you. I'm trying to think of ways to make it work.
Yeah. Whereas if you draw back to an adventure hook, it's kind of like there's, a mystery in the mine and this prospector wants it solved. That gives the GM kind of inspiration and ideas, but ultimately they can fill it with whatever they want. Right? The more granular you get, the more necessary it's going to become to talk system for it to still be useful. And speaking of useful, I hope you've found this podcast useful because we're
Hey.
here every week. You can find us on Twitch live, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. Pacific on a Monday. If you want to come hang out, it is Tuesday, 10 a.m. Australian Eastern Time, but it's the same stream because of time zones, timey-wimey, wobbly stuff. I just quickly also wanted to shout out that listener. I apologize, I don't remember your name off the top of my head, but the person who did the likes and thumbs and stars and stuff shirt, awesome. We might throw it up. I just didn't know if you wanted your face shown, so you'll probably be cut off from the neck down, just for privacy reasons. But yeah, it's a cool shirt. Thank you so much for sending that through. We really appreciate you tuning in every week. I've been Ben Byrne. I'm here every week with Dael Kingsmill, Shawn Merwin, James Hake, and we will be back next week with another episode of the Eldritch Lorecast. Ba-da-da, ba-da-da, ba-ba-ba-da-da.
Ooh.
Ba-da-da, ba-da-da, ba.
Ooh, that was fun. Yeah, that was good. Little twist on the butters.
Give us some jazz there, man.
Yeah. Hit it. Keep it going. Ba-da-ba. Yeah.
Ba-da-ba.
All right, and we have our producers back.